Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Now, US President Joe Biden's administration has come under immense pressure for hosting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for a state dinner at the White House, as a number of international human rights groups and organizations have repeatedly highlighted the gross human rights violations being carried out in the supervision of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in India and the threat to democracy over there in India. Now, as Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in the US on his state visit, President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, let me quote, that the president is not going to lecture Prime Minister Modi on the democratic backsliding and attacks on Muslims and other minorities, adding that this particular visit is a hinge moment in the US-India relations. Also, White House spokesperson John Kirby has said the visit will strengthen our two countries' shared commitment to a free, open, prosperous and secure Indo-Pacific, adding India will be a critical strategic partner for the US in the coming decades. Earlier, we saw that more than 70 Democrats from both the House of Representatives as well as the Senate wrote a letter to the President Biden urging him to discuss the need to protect human rights and democratic values as he meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Also, we have seen two Muslim Congresswomen have announced their boycott of Modi's address to the Congress on Friday. Likewise, Amnesty International as well as Human Rights Watch have screened a documentary which revealed the role of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the Gujarat massacre of 2002. Also, the Committee to Protect Journalists said in a statement, it expects the US to make India's media crackdown a core element of discussions. A number of rallies and protests were also planned by various rights groups. Earlier, we saw the US State Department as well as the US Commission on International Religious Freedom also expressed their concern regarding the human rights violations in India. The question arises whether the Biden administration is deliberately ignoring all these calls by international human rights groups and organizations, and to what gains. To discuss that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Javed Siddiq, his senior journalist. Mr. Javed, thank you very much for your time. Right. We are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Brigadier retired Waqar Hassan, his senior analyst. Brigadier Hassan, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And on Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Asma Shakir Khawaja. She is Executive Director, Center for International Strategic Studies in Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Asma, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Javed. The foreign policy of the United States, as we see this state visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi happening despite repeated calls by international human rights groups and organizations urging the president to bring this particular matter of human rights violations within India in IIOJK and the crackdown on the press within India. What do you think is driving the foreign policy of the United States of America? Is it more based on the concerns regarding the democratic values or the human rights violations, or is it based more on its own interests?
Well, the foreign policy of all countries, including the United States of America, is based on national interests. And the national interests are of supreme importance for the United States, and we have seen it. Pakistan has experienced this because Pakistan has been an ally of the United States in the last 50 years. Pakistan has been the member of SEATO and CENTO. Pakistan has been an ally of the United States in the war against terror, and we have seen that United States always gives primary importance to its national interest, nothing else. So, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is currently in the United States and is being hosted at dinner by the US President, was once declared as Butcher of Gujarat. He was denied the US visa. He was not allowed to enter the United States. and now he's the most honored guest of the United States.
I'll take this point later for discussion in the show. Let me proceed towards Brigadier Hassan. Brigadier Hassan, what's your understanding of this? Is the current foreign policy by the United States of America, is it driven solely based on its own interests?
I think if you look at U.S. Larger design in Indo-Pacific, and especially after President Obama, came up with the idea of Asia pivot. So main thing was main contender was China, and it remains so in the economic field and now in the military field as well. So India was to be projected, irrespective of what was the form of government, whether it was ruled by RSS or whether it was Congress. So it's been a persistent policy of bringing India into as a main player in the Indo-Pacific. So you found the creation of Quad, which we have Japan, Australia, United States, and India. Despite that, some of the military scholars in US and Australia feel that India is probably the weakest link because of lack of will. But anyway, this was to prop up. And then you saw some skirmishes on the line of actual control between India and China, in which India lost like 1450 square kilometers of area, and that's where they felt that probably it was a weaker. But I think successive governments have propped up India, and so that remains, I think, one of the mainstays of its foreign policy within Indo-Pacific. Definitely, as I think Javed Saab said, that it's their own national interest, and if the national interest is driven by changing geopolitical environment, definitely they have India
Right.
as one of their pampered kids. So this is one. Then comes why there is no issue of human rights, despite, like Jack Sullivan said, that okay, we'll communicate it in our own manner, but we'll not be giving a pep talk to India. So that is very, very typical. In the media you find a lot of debate, but otherwise at public level or policy level, I don't think so they'll be pushing Modi too much.
Right, let me bring in Dr. Asma also into the discussion. Dr. Asma, what's your understanding of this? Is the US following the policy based solely on its own national interest, deliberately ignoring the kind of human rights violations and the kind of democratic values which are under threat within India?
Yes, like all countries in this realm of real world or realism, they follow the foreign or defense or security policies which suits or which are compatible with their national interest. And unfortunately, the economic interest and India's glamorized image of being being a good big market for the capitalist world, that is working for India right now. However, it is not only America which is following its national interest, it is India at the same time. India is also following its national interest, and I don't think that if we see different review articles or analytical articles publishing on the visit by independent scholars publishing on the visit of Mr. Modi to the USA, that they are talking about it. Recently, I read an article by Mr. Daniel Murky, who very, I would say, that his article talked about the shared values between America and India, and I wonder what shared values American scholars are seeing or can see in this whole cooperation, because if because America, I mean, there is, I don't think there is any shared value between America and India, because in USA there is no genocide of minorities. US Constitution is not a discriminatory constitution which gives more importance and more privileges and rights to the majority. America is not a majoritarian country like India, and American democracy is not sliding down like India, because India has become an electoral autocracy. So I fail to understand, as a student of international security, that which shared values the writer was talking about. So if and like in India, for past few weeks, Manipur is burning because there
Right.
is anti-Christian rights in Manipur, and no one is
Right,
talking about it.
Dr.
And still,
Asma, I seek your pardon for the
what
interjection over here. I'll come back to you for the discussion later in the show. Mr. Javed, as you already mentioned, that it was Prime Minister Narendra Modi who was banned earlier with the sanctions to enter in the United States of America in 2005 for his gross human rights violations he had committed in India at that very time. Since he has become the Prime Minister back in 2014, that particular sanction of him entering into the United States was lifted. Now, giving a state dinner to a person who was already sanctioned because of his human rights violations, how do you see this particular journey?
The same, we go back to the earlier question, that the US foreign policy is driven by its own interests. And India can get away with everything. India can get away with the killings of the Muslims and atrocities being committed against Sikhs, Christians, Dalits, and other minorities. And the US State Department, in its annual report, has castigated the Indians for the treatment, the rough and rash treatment that is being meted out to the minorities in India. We should be seeing this in a different perspective. It's a well-known fact now. Let's look at it from the global perspective, global geopolitical complexion. I think India is now a very important partner of the United States of America. The primary function that the United States has given to India is to contain China in this region. And I think one of the main agenda items that is being discussed or will be discussed between President Biden and Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, will be the Indo-Pacific politics, because that's an area of concern for the United States of America. And there, the Americans are worried about the expanding influence of China. And in order to contain China and neutralize its influence in this region, they want the support of India. That is why they are looking the other way on the human rights violations in Indian Right Kashmir, as the lady was saying, in Manipur, where the entire area is burning and hundreds of people have been killed, and it's being ignored. Similarly, Sikhs are being killed, and they are being subjected to tremendous pressure, and a lot of terror has been unleashed against them. So that's being ignored, and even the United States is ignoring its own State Department report, which said that India is meting out a very rough and inhuman treatment to its minorities. That's being ignored because India is now a blue-eyed boy of the United States.
So this time around, the Biden administration is ignoring what the State Department expressed a concern.
Exactly.
Right. But earlier, the State Department also ignored the call by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, asking the State Department to add India in the list of countries of particular
exactly.
concern.
So it is not doing it because it needs Indian support to basically contain, or as the Chinese call it, encirclement of China. So India is now ready to play that part. And you will see that during these discussions, many other important issues are to be discussed. And one of the issues is going to be the defense agreement between the United States and India. And that has serious implications for Pakistan and all other regional countries.
Brigadier Hassan, now the state visit, the state dinner at the White House, from being sanctioned in 2005, from entering into the US, to getting the state dinner at the White House. Can't we say that it's an attempt on the part of the US administration under President Biden to endorse what is being done by the Indian authorities within India and with minorities as well as with the Muslims in IIOJK?
I think that I would second Javed Saab. Basically, we've discussed the national interest and the global interest of the United States. But there also a role of corporate India, how they packaged Modi after Gujarat massacre. You have seen Adani and Ambani, a lot of scandals about the financial dealing and how they were tainted. Mainly it was the Gujarati businessman who packaged initially as the chief minister, then he was propelled on the national stage. So then is the Indian diaspora within the United States, North America and most of Europe. So they played a very, I think, prominent role. Unfortunately, the RSS ideology, I think that, if you give me just time, how from 2014 it has been imposed, and the way they are now actually trying to rewrite history. They are trying to rewrite even the culture. And I feel that this idea of majority suppressing minority is actually other way around. If you give me a minute. There was a Mandal Commission which published a report in 1977, and the figures were that the upper caste, which actually is the middle class and which controls most of the, let's say, finances and money and everything and jobs, is 23%. So it's basically a minority suppressing the majority. Like Muslims are, some people say 250 million, Dalits are 220 million, then you have Shudras again from the Varnas, but then the lower caste, which is like 400 million. And you combine the smaller minorities like Sikhs and Christians and Adivasis, like as Javed mentioned in Manipur. So it's 77% majority is being suppressed by 23% minority. But the impression is that probably minority. So India has a very large disenfranchised class. I would say the majority is disenfranchised, and that for Muslims they come up with special laws like Nuremberg laws. If you look at Beti Bachao, Ghar Wapsi, the ban on cow slaughter. So it was to target their economics, and this is very similar to what the Germany did to Jews in 1930s. So they have applied those laws. Like in Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath would openly say that I mean, he's passed so much derogatory remarks about Muslims that I can't repeat it. And now this is resonating. It was initially in North India and the cow belt. Now it's going to South. Like in Karnataka, there was a lot of debate on Tipu Sultan, who is a known freedom fighter for entire India, but now they're saying that he was ruthless.
So that is the point I was actually coming to. In Karnataka state polls, we have seen the kind of a backlash towards the Hindutva ideology in the recent state polls. The Congress has won, had a landslide victory against the Bharatiya Janata Party. That is what the people are seeing within India. And why isn't that one visible to the international community, especially the US?
Yeah, that's, I think, this was the BJP's, I would say, playbook. Since they succeeded in the cow belt, then they wanted to even take it to Northeast. Like if you look at Manipur, there's basically there are two major communities. Like Nagas have then of course Kukis, and then there are Maitis, which are basically Hindus and tribals and Christians. So again, basically it's the Hindutva card which was played, maybe to undermine and then find a space for BJP.
That was defeated in Karnataka state polls.
Yeah, they were, because now people realize, because they rallied. I would also like to highlight it's not only minorities. Even if there is a dissenting voiced in, let's say, Hindus. I give example of Gauri Lankesh, Professor Dabholkar, Professor Pansare, then Kulburgi. They were murdered by Sanatan Sanstha and Avinav Bharat, which is a militant organization of the RSS or Vishwa Hindu Parishad. And one of their leading figures was Sadhgi Pragya Thakur, who is sitting in the Lok Sabha. So this is the kind of message which is going to even dissenting voices or liberal voices. And if you look at, like, NDT have been now bought by Adani's, which used to be a liberal channel, but there is a very squeezing space. Similarly, I think Rana Ayub, I think on 20th wrote an article in Washington Post where she mentioned that Modi was actually weaponizing Bollywood. So this is the kind of cultural, historical war being waged against, I would say, the majority by this elite group or middle class, which is led by, because this is the vote bank of RSS. And unfortunately, Indian diaspora in the United States, North America and Europe is also somehow, if you look at the way Modi is being received, or Howdy Modi, rallies earlier. So they are also.
But this time a rally that's been titled as Howdy Democracy.
Yeah, Howdy Democracy. Yeah.
There's been.
Unfortunately, you have seen the Yoga Day and Modi Saab, leading that, and on the other side, Manipur is burning.
That's very interesting. Because yes, on one side we see the kind of fire they are playing with within India, and on the international level they are projecting a very soft image like yoga, which literally means to unite. On the home front, they are creating more and more divisions, while rather ironically they're giving a kind of a message on the international level of being united. What does that depict?
So this has been the duplicate, I would say, it's a double policy that within, they have a lot of suppression, and if you compare it with anyone in South Asia, it is unprecedented the way they have gone. Let's say, looking at even the Kashmiri leadership in the occupied Kashmir, they are, behind bars in Tihar jail for last 5 years, and there are no court trials, and they have put literally curfew for last 5 years in Indian occupied Kashmir. You put 1 million, soldiers, and then you claim that, it's all hunky, like G20, farce of the conference.
Let me bring Dr. Asma into the discussion once again. Dr. Asma, as you already mentioned that you don't see any sort of convergence of interest when it comes to Jake Sullivan's statement that you already alluded to between India and the United States of America. Now, when we specifically talk about this state dinner at the White House, not every foreign leader gets that state dinner also. So keeping your understanding, as you already mentioned, you don't see that much of confluence or the convergence of interest between the US and India, then why this state dinner to a person who was earlier sanctioned in 2005 for being the violator of the human rights in his own country?
First of all, I didn't say that there is no convergence of interest, because we all know that they have their common interest in containing or affecting the rise of China. But I said there is no convergence of values, which Mr. Daniel Murky wrote in his article. So there is a difference between values and interests.
Right.
Then, as you asked about the state dinner, it shows that America is trying its best to at least keep India neutral or abstain, and not directly supporting Russia or China in any in any future scenario where it is needed. And this becomes very important when Indian External Minister Mr. Jaishankar, he once stated that India should benefit from any as many ties as it can. It means that India talks about strategic autonomy. India talks about non-alignment and neutrality. And while abstaining when US needs Indian vote, India is actually favoring the other party. So all this what is being done by Mr. Biden, there can be two reasons for that. One, to refrain India to at least stay abstain when there is any resolution in UN or international organization regarding Russia-Ukraine conflict. Number two, to influence the Indian vote bank in the US in favor of Republicans. So this can be the similar reason. This can be the reasons. But as there is another article by Ashley Tellis who wrote that India is a bad bet for America, because all the strategic security analysts and analysis indicates upon that India may not a mere follower or mere weight in Americans' foreign policy, because if we see the strategic ambitions of India, India is looking for to be a pole, not an exclusive partner of any bloc. So this is what India is doing, and India is doing for last 75 years. If we see Indian strategic culture, they keep their options open. But yeah, right now, US is trying that India would shut few options for the sake of US or American interests, which I don't see that would be possible in any time soon. Moreover, in this with this visit of Mr. Modi to USA is for greater strategic defense and economic cooperation. And that cooperation is basically about the share of modern technology, sophisticated technology, which is very important right now for India, because we all know that because of Russia-Ukraine war, the modernization of Indian military is getting slowed, or it is on slow pace, and India wants to look for other options to modernize its military and the equipments, and that is why they both are India and the US are interesting to for technological cooperation in the field of defense. So we have to wait and see what are the outcomes of this visit. Right now, we are only speculating. For me, it was very interesting that Mr. Modi took a circular showcase troops from Gujarat to the US so that they can cherish and they can play music and dance outside of White House, and so that the Indian media can report that Indian Americans are so happy with the visit of Modi. While we are talking about human rights and other issues in India, we should also understand that there is considerable number of South Asian community living in the USA, and they are protesting against Mr. Modi's visit. So that is a very important move, and Indians, secular Indians, are also participating in those protests, and they have writing letters to the American parliamentarians. So everything is not that rosy which it looks like, which is it looks from the media lens. Things are complicated. That is why I think we should wait and see that how things move during Mr. Modi's visit, because USA sees India as a major defense partner and a key pillar in Indo-Pacific strategy. And we have to see with what options of cooperation India and the US come up in for Indo-Pacific. In India Pacific, especially we call India Pacific as Asia Pacific, because India Pacific is a colonial term and we don't appreciate it. But we have to see their common interest is to block China in Asia Pacific. So we have to see how they would come up and what strategies they would finalize or what MOUs they would sign. So this when India is an electoral autocracy, ironically, the US officials stated that India wants to establish its ties on democratic values with India, and I don't know how the compatibility in this regard would be created. I don't know that how Mr. Biden would refrain, because US spokesperson said that Mr. Biden will not lecture Mr. Modi on human rights. And this is again ironic when US institutions, they are declaring that India is a dangerous country for minorities, and the treatment with minorities is not up to the mark. And when Mr. Biden is meeting Mr. Modi, he is not lecturing him on human rights. So this is a bit contradictory to the general US behavior, while and this also shows that how important or supreme it is for the US policymakers to find friends which can support US in containment of China. And here it is another it's interesting thing that US wants to contain China in terms of defense. But apparently, India is also interested in economic containment of China, despite being the biggest trade partner of China. And we also should take this into account that India and China had 18 ministerial level official meetings to solve the issue of Golhan. So India is not opting for any military or aggressive posture to resolve her differences with China. So maybe USA is bit more anxious or overstated the capacity of India to deal with China. And we also have to understand that India seeks its strategic significance by enhancing the security concerns of the USA vis-a-vis China. So India, this is a very tricky situation, but we have to see what would be the outcomes and how those outcomes of this visit would be implemented, because we don't forget that during Mr. Obama's, another Republican president, time, India and the US signed the deal for civilian nuclear program, and the deal was signed but never been executed. So we have to see that what would be the outcomes and how those outcomes would be executed.
Right, right. Mr. Javed, when we talk about the defense cooperation between the United States of America and India, keeping in view the defense ties between Russia and India, so the kind of relationship Indians have with the Russians in the purchase of S-400 defense system, also purchasing the Russian oil. Don't you think that happens to be an irritant when it comes to US-India defense cooperation in particular?
I don't think so, because the Americans are looking the other way, because currently they need the support of India in its geopolitical objectives, to promote its geopolitical objectives. India is also looking for alternative markets to acquire the defense technology. And one of the issues that is going to be discussed between the Indian Prime Minister and the US administration is the initiative on critical technologies, critical and emerging technologies, which is actually India is trying to modernize its military hardware, and that is the focus there. And I think India is also trying to shift its focus from Russia or from Moscow in terms of acquiring weapons from Russia. If you look at the statistics, 10 years back, India was importing 65% of its military weapons from Russia. And during the Cold War period, the entire Indian military hardware and military machine was being fed by Russia. And they had the Indians had actually no relations, defense relations or defense cooperation with the United States of America then. But now India is keen to shift away from Moscow to Washington to acquire latest technology, defense technology. And as I have read in some of the analysis that has been done about the Moody's visit to US, that in one of the items that they are going to discuss is to produce the modern engines for the fighters of Indian aircrafts, and these engines are to be produced in India. So India is trying to acquire the defense technology from United States, and US has an edge over its rivals, main rivals, Russia and China, when it comes to aviation technology. So India is trying to make use of it. They are trying to cash in on that situation, and I think they are shifting it. And as you have said, that the Indians are buying oil from Russia. The United States has not objected to it. India has not fully condemned the Russian attack on
Isn't
Ukraine.
that one also an irritant? But it hasn't followed the US's
It is not
line.
an irritant for them. So they are ignoring everything because currently they need the Indian support to promote and basically their own objectives, strategic objectives, geopolitical objectives in the world.
Right, Brigadier Hassan, balancing act when it comes to defense cooperation with the US and with Russia, because India today remains to be the largest importer of the Russian arms.
I think in the larger context, as Javed Sahab has pointed out, is it's not really US India, but it's Eurasia, basically which is being driven, Eurasian Brotherhood concept by China and Russia, and the Indo-Pacific, where non-Asian powers are trying to collude with India to form an alliance. So you look at Japan, Australia, and America, and now you have France and Germany. So this is the context in the larger game of things, and I think India will have a challenge. I somehow feel that as it was discussed, because Russia-Ukraine war is exposed to very major fault lines between US and India. One was, of course, because when they put economic sanctions on Russia, they wanted it should be cut off, but India then helped because it was a mutually I would say beneficial arrangement. And then is de-dollarization. If you look at the BRICS bank, and now BRICS is expanding, which is basically a I would say Western bloc, and India is a very active member of that. So this is going to be the larger. Now how does India balance it out? And how much, because US, in case they want to offer hardware and military technology, they would like India to stand up as a bulwark against China militarily, because they were trying to even encourage the clash on LS. They wanted to have a major conflict. But I think India, like Jaishankar has pointed out a number of times, that all of European problems are not Western problems, not let's say world problem. So I think there is a discussion going on within India also. It's a very difficult balancing act, because ultimately if you look at the SCO or Eurasian, let's say, landmass and economy, it is 2/3 of the global economy. So I think still we have to see what comes out of this, parlays between the two presidents and what kind of arrangement come. But I think it's going to be quite challenging for both sides, India, and because the Russians and Chinese must be watching it, that here you sit in SCO and you claim a lot of things, and other side you are trying to play the Western, card in the Indo-Pacific. So this is going to be, I think, very interesting.
Right. Dr. Asma, your quick last comment regarding the 70 Democrats writing a letter to President Biden urging him to talk about the democratic values and the human rights violations in India in his meeting with Prime Minister Modi. We have also seen two Congresswomen also announcing the boycott of the Modi's address to the Congress on Friday. How do you see that?
Maybe and see, writing a letter is a very strong statement that the American public and the constituencies those congressmen are representing, they are really concerned about the democratic downsliding and the human rights violations in India, and the American government, despite having greater strategic interests, cannot ignore this scenario of human rights violation, minorities situation, and the freedom of speech. All those issues are very grim in India right now, and those are definitely of a matter of concern. So this is, I think, this is going to impact the whatever the outcome of US India this cooperation or agreements. So we have to see, let's see that how that those 70 congressmen letter signed by 70 congressmen lead, how it would affect Mr. Biden's and American decision makers thought process while dealing with India. But definitely these letters, they are very important for press perception building, and they have their role in creating images across the board. So this is I don't
Right, your
but
point
there
is well taken,
I
Dr.
don't
Asma.
think so there.
Shakir Khawaja, Executive Director, Center of International Strategic Studies, AJK, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. Mr. Javed Siddiq joining us in the studio, Senior Journalist. Mr. Javed, thank you very much for your time also. And Brigadier Retired Waqar Hassan, Senior Analyst. Brigadier Hassan, thank you very much for your time also, being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves and thank you for watching.